Well, hello everyone. My name is Aliyah Archer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an undergraduate anthropology major here at UNC. As an anthropology major, I am interested in studying humans, both past and present. By proxy, that means studying current issues and how they impact people today. I have found myself looking closely at the realm of public health. The motto for our public health program here at UNC is public health is everything and everything is public health. Through my studies, I have seen nothing more true than how health expands beyond the doctor's office to include mental health, social health, and community health. One essential component of health is the food that we eat, not just in the sense that we need it to be nutritious, but also that we need it to be safe. The globalization and industrialization of our food systems means that while access to food has expanded in many ways, the opportunity for harmful contaminants in our food chains has increased. For example, in 2021, public health officials found that some spices and herbs in our kitchens contain harmful levels of heavy metals. Consumer Reports tested 126 products in 2021 from different companies and brands sold in the US and found that almost a third had heavy metal levels high enough to raise health concerns. These heavy metals are a problem because too much of these metals will bioaccumulate, become carcinogenic, and cause higher rates of cancer, as well as other health risks like liver and kidney failure. Not only is this a physical health concern, but a mental health concern as well. Knowing this information without an accessible way to test products at home can lead to higher stress rates and further distrust and anxieties for people within our systems. Research has found that these metals are most often introduced through the soil spices are grown in, different water contaminants, and how these spices are processed. Metals are important for the function of the human body. However, in excess, some metals can cause dysregulation and have harmful side effects. Since the original research done by Consumer Reports had been done a few years prior, my question was whether or not these toxic levels of heavy metals still contaminated the spices readily available in our community. To test this theory, I used a technology called X-ray fluorescence, also known as XRF, that measures the elements present in an object. Now, I know this sounds complicated, but I promise is a lot more simple than it sounds. Let's start small. Does everyone here know what an atom is, or at least have heard of it? Great. For those who may not know or need a brief reminder, atoms are the little tiny particles that make up everything in existence. Atoms themselves are made up of protons and neutrons in the center, also known as the nucleus, and electrons that swirl around the outside. Each element on the periodic table is defined by the number of protons in the nucleus. Electrons emit photons, which are packets of energy perceived as light when they move from a higher energy level to a lower energy level. This means each element has a unique photon energy signature emitted when its electrons move, which allows us to see what different elements are within a sample. So, how does the XRF do this? Well, by using X-rays or high energy photons, the XRF blasts these X-rays into the innermost electron orbitals of the atoms in a sample, displacing one electron. Another electron moves in from an outer shell to fill the empty space in order to keep the element in balance, which releases those unique photon signatures. This is called fluorescence. So, just like our electron orbitals, we have come full circle as to why this is called an X-ray fluorescence instrument. Once these photons are released by the electrons in a sample, the XRF reads the energy levels of each emission and calculates what elements are present, as well as the number of photons present at each energy level. The more photons there are at a higher energy level, the more of that element is going to be present within a sample. For my samples, I wanted to make sure that I was using things that were locally available and things that people were actively using. I got many donations from my peers that came directly from their own kitchens, and I was also awarded a grant from the Office of Undergraduate Research to be able to go out and purchase any remaining spices from local stores. The spices I chose to sample were based on the study done by Consumer Reports in what spices seemed to be the most at risk. The spices tested included basil, black pepper, chili, cinnamon, crushed red pepper, coriander, cumin, curry, ginger, onion, oregano, paprika, thyme, and turmeric from a range of brands, including some organic. I also decided to include some tea in my sampling to test a different type of herb that was not on the spices list. These teas I included in my sampling were black and green teas. In the end, I took 142 samples of spices and 20 samples of tea. I tested each sample twice and took separate portions of each test to be able to test more of each sample. Each group of spice or tea had at least 10 different brand samples with coriander and thyme, including an extra sample from the same brand, but it was a different version, either organic or some sort of mix. It took me over 20 hours of work over the course of about a month to collect all of my samples and analyze the data through our RTAX software system. Once I got all of the data into the RTAX system, it was time to analyze what are called spectra. Spectra look like this. When our photons release their energy frequencies, the XRF measures the amount of energy in kilo electron volts, or to keep it simpler, keV. keV is the horizontal line, our x-axis, and our vertical line, the y-axis, represents how many photons of that keV energy level the detector counted during measurement. The higher the peak, the more photons. After some background research, the metals I decided to look for within my spectra were lead, cadmium, arsenic, and mercury. The peaks we were focused on for this project were what are called the K-alpha and L-alpha peaks. K-alpha is the most primary peak and indicates that there would be a high amount of a certain metal in a sample. L-alpha is just a step down from K-alpha in energy displacement of electrons in the electron shell. There are other types of peaks, but they are often just traces or have potential overlap with other elements. If present, mercury atoms will fluoresce at 9.98 keV, lead at 10.55 keV, arsenic at 10.53 keV, and cadmium at 23.1 keV. So, what did I find at these keV levels? Well, the good news, nothing. The spectra shown here depict small bumps and waves called Bremsstrahlung scatter or background scatter. This is created by escaping electrons, causing a constant scattering emission of energy. Peaks are very noticeable, as seen by the previous examples of chlorine, potassium, and calcium peaks in basal samples, that first image. So, what does this mean for us? Since the study done by Consumer Reports in 2021, there seems to have been an effective change leading to the reduction of heavy metals in spices. All of the spices and brands that were tested came up negative for any indication of mercury, lead, cadmium, or arsenic. While this is good news and can relieve us of any stress of being poisoned by our kitchen spices, heavy metal contaminants are still things that we need to be aware of. Consumer Reports, the FDA, and the journal Frontiers in Nutrition have all reported on heavy metal contamination in different foods and agricultural soils within the last year. The most at-risk population is young children. Even things like Lunchables with high levels of sodium can be dangerous and lead to higher health risks. It is vital for the future health of humanity that we are aware of what we are consuming and what is truly in the products we are buying. This means taking a good look at our economic, labor, agricultural, and food processing systems to understand what changes need to be made. It is my hope that this research helps to spread awareness about food contamination and we are able to start seeing changes. I also want to discuss the possible future directions of this research and its implications. One pathway that I have discussed is looking into the nutrient profiles of these spices to understand how certain herbs and spices are beneficial to health and medicinal practices. Truth be told, so much of this knowledge is already out there. There are so many indigenous communities who understand the uses of herbs and spices as medicine in a much better way than the American healthcare and education systems do. However, the unfortunate truth is that we do not do a good job at learning and appreciating that knowledge. We have taken for granted these practices of those who know this land and have a connection to the natural world. As an anthropologist, I think it is crucial for me to say that I do not believe that Western science has all of the explanations. I believe that this research possibility would help many who do not have a cultural background in native medicinal practices be able to better grasp and understand the concepts and importance of our connections with nature. But I also believe that it demands of us to recognize that this is not new knowledge, nor is it some trend. This livelihood has been diminished at the hands of colonialism, which should reflect to us how harmful our systems have been, not only to others, but also to ourselves, and further push us into requiring change of ourselves, our systems, and how we view our place in the world. If this research topic is able to be pursued, I fully intend on reaching out to local Indigenous communities to see if they would be willing to help me understand this knowledge, as well as partner with me to understand contamination impacts within their own communities as a result of colonial practices. Food safety is important for everyone. All human beings need food to survive, and I, for one, would hope that our societies and systems prioritize the safety of this basic human need. It is organizations like the Food and Drug Administration that helps us keep an eye on these things and keep our systems in check. If this organization were to be underfunded or cut, we would lose access to pertinent information that could cause harm to millions of people before it is caught. Luckily, it looks like we are in the clear, at least with our kitchen spices for now. Before I go, I would like to thank Dr. Marion Hamilton for advising me with this project, always pushing me to go further with my work, and for believing in what I am capable of. I would also like to thank my peers from the class of Anthropology 338 for aiding in sample collection and the Anthropology Lab Group for their support. This project was funded through the University of Northern Colorado's Office of Undergraduate Research, and thanks to them for awarding me the 2024 Spring Research Grant. And last, but certainly not least, I want to thank all of you here today for giving me a chance to share my work with you and hopefully be able to broaden our horizons together. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
So with the elements of heavy metals found in our spices, are those naturally in our food and do we have to take them out? Or is somebody or something putting them back into our food?
That's a great question. So from what I know and from what I'm aware of, there are definitely heavy metal or metal elements present in almost anything we consume. You know, from just things being grown in the ground, plants will absorb some of those things and you'll have those kinds of contamination. The issue has arisen where through industrialization and those kinds of practices or through human contamination of soils at higher levels by dumping waste into rivers that's then used to water plants and things like that, that's where that higher level of contamination comes in. There are levels that I don't have exact numbers for because we didn't find anything. So I didn't go further into looking yet at what those contamination levels are. But, you know, some is not always terrible to consume. It's when it's too high of a level and you're consuming it more consistently that it becomes a problem. Consumer Reports and the FDA within the last year actually did a recall of those children's applesauce packets because they were finding that they had really high levels of lead in them. And that's really, really harmful for child development. And so because children would be eating those all the time and they already had those levels of lead that were not FDA necessarily approved, that's what's kind of causing those issues, is that exponential, like a little too high level plus that continuous consumption. Yeah.
The challenges of using some of the techniques used in this project to kind of assess the claims made by indigenous knowledge without undermining those knowledge.
Yeah.
I just think that boundary is very interesting.
Yeah. So I recently in one of our classes, we got to talk with someone who has done a lot of research for their own indigenous roots and like has connected with their community and done all of this stuff. And so we were talking a lot about this and how there's so many things that they have learned. Like they actually went to school here and they learned so much through like their different departments that they were like, oh, this is really interesting. But on some fundamental basis level, this is stuff that the indigenous community already knows. You know, they're using herbs and spices to combat certain illnesses and they know exactly which ones go where. They might not be able to tell you, well, this protein is why that this causes that, and like those kinds of things. So it's kind of important to recognize that they're smart. They know what helps what. They just might not be able to tell you exactly why in the same senses that Western medicine would. And so my goal would be able to talk with them and see what are those things, what are they using to understand what kind of we can do to actually implement those things a little better, because there's plenty of research out there that shows, well, turmeric is really good for indigestion and different things like that. But these people know those things so much deeper because they've had such a longer history of working with those things. So I would want to know kind of more about that side of it and what actually is used within the communities, but then also see if there has been an impact of this kind of heavy metal contamination within their own communities, within their own agricultural practices, and like whether or not they're buying things from stores and if those things are contaminated, or if, say, like their water sources are contaminated for those things that they're growing and using within their own communities. Thank you so much.